Today was a very productive day. Obviously, I don't know if you guys could see, I had disconnected the steering shaft at the rack joint. Now, this 240Z universal is a smaller diameter shaft than what was on here, right? So this is basically the same thing for a WRX. It's close, but it is a little bit smaller. So instead of trying to force this onto the shaft of the steering rack, what I did was I pulled this off. Actually, I didn't pull it off. I did pull it off the actual 240Z steering rack, but I cut this off and cleaned it up. I cut the U-joint off on this end, and what it had on the WRX side was a hole. In fact, you could see the edges here. So the shaft is pressed in. I don't know if you could get the reflection just right. You could see a circular outline, right? So the shaft is pressed in and then welded all around. And so that's exactly what I did. Therefore, I had a 240Z shaft, but it was splined correctly, so it would hold. I still got to put this bolt in right here, by the way. But it's splined correctly, and it'll hold in the WRX rack. Now, a lot of guys have used the older racks, and with great success. I use the newer rack because that's what I can get for cheap on the old, from a merchant on the old Bay of E. But here you can see the Techno Toy Tuning tie rod ends working perfectly with the Volvo inners. That is in. The rack is complete. I had to hack up my subframe a little bit so you could see my oil pan hangs below, so that's not an issue. I'll get to that in a second. So the subframe, so this is these Techno Toy Tuning bits, they come with spacers for bump steer. You could move the heim joint lower or higher. You can't actually have the heim joint up against the spindle because it would bind up, it wouldn't move. So you would need at least a washer or two. So if I wanted the tie rod ends parallel with my control arm, these are close. These are very close actually, but not quite. So if I wanted them parallel, I would just cut a shim off of that upper spacer, just like a tiny bit, and then it would be perfect. So on to over here, the original pressure lines for the power steering. I don't know what you would call them, but see, I had to clearance my cross member to fit. That's where you're going to run into issues. Maybe with the older Subaru racks you won't have to, because they're the same width and they have the same threads for the Volvo ball joints. But this is a non-issue for me, because what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a piece of angle iron and put it like so, like this, along the bottom, from this end all the way to this end. First off, reinforcing this cross member, which I hacked up on this end, and second off, having a little bit of I guess kind of like a bulldoze effect, so where I'm not busting up my oil pan on this engine. This engine is, of course, not the permanent engine. As you could say, on this end, I put the steering shaft in where or close to the factory location on, let me try to get back there, on where it would be on a 240Z, but the angle isn't quite the same, and I had to cut a large portion of the engine mount out. So then I'm going to reinforce it on this end like so, because the steering shaft can go through it. That won't be a problem. It's just I can't have it's still held on by two sides, but that third side is gone. I took 80% of it out, so I will have to reinforce that, and that won't be an issue, because it won't, like, anything that'll come off of here and then connect to there won't affect the me pulling out the steering rack if I ever need to replace it or rebuild it or whatever. So yeah, you could see where that happened. So a large portion of this structurally is a little bit weaker, not a lot, but a little. However, the good news is now it used to touch my header. You could see where over there on the shiny spot. So what I was afraid of was that this shaft would be too long, or I mean too short. As it turns out, it's too long. So, and it's placed more outboard, obviously, by this. So, more room for headers, etc., etc. Let me, yep, there's that side. The drill bit that comes with the Techno Toy Tuning tie rod ends isn't the greatest. I had to stop midway. It was good for one spindle, and then to do the other spindle, I had to sharpen it. But here's my steering shaft. It is too long, which means I'll be pulling it off of here, but it spins. See? With no interference. Right now I'm all the way one way, and then I spin it the other way. So for now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put the stubs of the power steering pump hoses in, and then loop them through, put some fluid in there so that A, lubricates it, and B, keeps it all from drying up, and it'll just run as you turn left and right. It'll run the power steering fluid in a closed loop. When I swap motors, then I'm going to convert to power steering. So yeah, the boots are on, even with the shorter. You could hear it gurgling, but it's all full of air. But what's cool about this is in the factory location, say right here, I'm gonna have to remove this battery, whatever. In the factory location, it comes nowhere near the headers. So it actually gives you more room, but you have to hack up the cross members. I was hoping I wouldn't have to do that. There's a guy from another country, he has right-hand drive, so he had to convert. And he did it over, but see how this has like a really mild angle on the U-joints? Well, he has some really drastic angles, like kind of Z's back and forth. And honestly, I'm not willing to risk that, especially at the speeds that this would be driven. So at least the front end is done, complete. All that's left now is the actual dash work. I have to shorten my actual shaft. The drive, not the drive shaft, the steering shaft in accordance with where the steering wheel falls in. So that welding I did today was, well, on top of being ugly, it was also kind of useless because I'll have to cut it and redo it all over. The engine is moving backwards, yes. So that's one of the things I'll have to do next besides reinforcing the cross member. And of course, you know, there's still the rust I gotta address, and there's all kinds of crazy stuff I gotta do. So, but that's that. You got Dodge Neon coilovers, you got 2014 Mustang spindle, 2014 Mustang ball joint socket, so that the tips of the control arm was cut off and welded on. You could see that right there. I never even painted it. And 240Z tie rod ends, but they were custom from Techno Toy Tuning because I needed them to have that 5/8 bore so that I can drill through and use them, because the 240Z ones won't work. Volvo inners and WRX or Impreza or whatever you want to call it. Speaking of which, see, this thing's so rotten, my mount completely fell out. So there's plenty of work to do on this piece of junk. But back to what I was saying. So WRX steering rack, 240Z steering shaft, Volvo inners, I mean, 240Z outers, 2014 Mustang spindle and ball joint, and Dodge Neon coilovers with 240Z uppers, or the caps, or whatever you want to call them. Well, what's cool though is camber is going to be adjustable at the spindle, so I don't have to worry about, you know, how guys have to have camber plates, and really how many degrees does that really give you? In fact, next to nothing. So being able to adjust it at the spindle like a modern car is actually kind of cool. All right, now I can finally finish up the rear. get the engine moved backwards and start mocking up the dash. Plenty of work to do, but by the end of the week, I'm really hoping that I'm gonna have it on the ground and rolling and have a final measurement for those half shafts for the CV axles so that I can get them in as soon as possible. And when I return back to Oregon, I can actually have it driving and doing burnouts, racing, road tripping, whatever. I mean, winter's upon us, but let's face it, whether I like it or not, I'm just gonna have to brace the cold and go somewhere warm and see if I could do some racing wherever the weather isn't bad. Arizona or any other place like that. Zip tie drags, maybe I could attend those again and maybe actually get more than one race in. I kind of sucked last time, but it was still a cool event. I got to meet some cool people, so it was all right. Well, take it easy, and I'll see you tomorrow. I'm gonna try to upload another video with more progress. My laptop is broken, so I'm gonna try this for a while. I will try to put together better, longer videos, but daily updates, if you guys don't mind, I will do as well.